Welcome to South Arts informational webinar for presentation grants. Please know that today's webinar is being recorded and we will make it available on our website for those that were unable to join today, or if you'd like to revisit any part of the presentation. I'm Nikki Estes, and I'm the Director Presenting and Touring at South Arts. I manage several of our programs and our dance initiatives. We also have Joy Young, South Arts Vice President of Programs, on today's call. Joy, do you want to say hello?
Here we go. I am so glad to say hello and welcome each of you to today's webinar. So a hearty hello to those of you whom I'm greeting for the first time. Some of you might know me from my work at the South Carolina Arts Commission, while some of you may know me from my work as Executive Director of the local arts agency in Jacksonville, Florida. I say hello and greetings to you. Today's webinar about presenting grants will provide you with updates and give you tips to develop a compelling application. Your leader today is going to be Nikki, who's already introduced herself, and Molly and Ethan, and all are well-versed in the field and longtime members of the South Arts family. I'm again so glad to have you here, and now back to you, Nikki.
Thank you, Joy. Ethan Massir is the Assistant Director Presenting and Touring. Ethan, would you like to say hello?
Hi there, everybody. I'm the Assistant Director of Presenting and Touring. I work on a number of South Arts grant programs, and I've worked on a number of programs with the organization over the years here.
Thank you. So Ethan will assist us at the end of today's presentation with the questions and answer section. Also on today's webinar is Molly Quinlan Hayes. She is the Director of Arts Ready and an arts consultant. Molly, would you like to say a few words?
Thanks, Nikki. Hello, everyone. Yes, I was with South Arts for many years and now work nationally as an independent arts consultant, but I'm happy to continue working with the South Arts Arts Ready program. And I'll be talking later in the webinar about the readiness plan expectations. Thanks.
Okay. Great, so welcome everyone again. We're going to turn off our cameras now so that you can see the full-length presentation. Just bear with me 1 second, please. Okay, so this morning we will provide a general overview of South Arts and our grant programs, but we'll focus on the presentation grants. I will review recent changes and we'll spend plenty of time discussing accessibility, helping you to learn more about South Arts expectations, and readiness plans, helping you to understand what is needed and how your response will be evaluated. We will look at the application process, panel review process, and grantee responsibilities. Also, there will be time to answer your questions. If you do have a question, please use the Q&A box at the bottom to type your question, and we'll be sure to answer it at the end of our presentation. To begin, let's start with a very brief overview of South Arts and our priorities. Our mission statement is advancing Southern vitality through the arts. Our work and purpose are designed to address the issues important to the Southern region, and we hope to link the South with the nation and the world through the arts. Our strategic plan includes efforts to support the artistic and professional growth of artists in the South, to connect artists and arts professionals to resources, to advance impactful arts-based programs that recognize and address the trends of our changing communities, and to communicate and celebrate the excellence and power of the arts in the South. South Arts Strategic Plan refocuses our efforts more directly on Southern artists and arts organizations. We recognize that Southern artists and arts organizations are under-resourced, and we are working to both attract national resources and attention to the best in the region, and to help Southern artists live and thrive in the South. Most of our programs that emphasize recipient organization support of Southern artists are now in place, as well as our direct support of artists in our region. We also know that BIPOC and LGBTQIA+ organizations and artists are under-resourced. We are committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we have prioritized this commitment to ensure that BIPOC-led and LGBTQIA+-led organizations are represented as both applicants and grantees. In addition, we encourage applications for projects that engage BIPOC and LGBTQIA+ artists. To fulfill our mission and goals, we support Southern artists and arts organizations through our fellowships and grants. We support Southern communities through Southern Circuit, for example, our tour of independent films that bring filmmakers to Southern communities. We also support organizational sustainability by offering Arts Ready. And finally, we offer special initiatives that focus on a specific art form, such as the Dance Touring Initiatives, Jazz Road, and In These Mountains program. As a regional arts organization, we partner with the National Endowment for the Arts and state arts agencies in these 9 states to deliver services and provide programming. Most of our programs operate within our 9-state region, but we have other programs like Arts Ready and Jazz Road that reach beyond these states to serve the national arts community. To be clear, you must be located in our region to be eligible for our grants programs. Now we'll take a quick look at several programs that are offered to organizations. At the moment, we have several grant programs and Jazz Road. Although we will focus on presentation grants, I simply want to mention other funding opportunities for organizations. Please visit our website for specific guidelines and eligibility criteria for each of these programs. One of the goals is to engage Southern artists in Southern communities, so all of our grant programs require organizations to engage Southern artists for public presentations and educational activities. Our presentation grant now supports performing arts, literary arts, film, and visual arts projects. The Traditional Arts Touring Program supports performing arts and visual arts projects. The Express Grants Program supports all disciplines as well, but this program is specifically for organizations in small and rural communities of 50,000 people or less. Also, we offer grants to help presenters' capacity and their professional development needs. The Professional Development and Artistic Planning Grant supports expenses for new professional development opportunities. This includes participation at a workshop or conference that your organization has never attended, and it can be either virtual or in person. Also, this program can support staff training needed to address diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility efforts, or technical needs for this new virtual world of programming. Our cross-sector impact grants encourages partnerships between arts and non-arts organizations that address community needs. And Jazz Road Creative Residencies will support community residencies with jazz musicians of 2 weeks or more. In some cases, organizations are allowed to submit applications for multiple programs. However, there are some restrictions, so I recommend that you carefully review the guidelines and contact South Arts staff if you have questions. Our presentation grant replaces our performing arts touring and literary arts touring programs from the past. This new program connects performing artists, writers, poets, film directors, and visual artists to constituents in Southern communities. The program supports engagements by guest artists and must include at least 2 separate activities, at least 1 public presentation, and at least 1 educational activity provided by the guest artist. The project period ranges from September 1st, 2021 through June 30th of 22. Applicants are allowed to request up to 2/3 of the artist fee. Grant requests can range from $1,000 up to $7,500. Just keep in mind that our grant funds solely support the artist fee rather than other project expenses. So what this means is that if you are requesting $1,000, the artist fee is $1,500. The grant request is $1,000 and your cash match represents $500. And I'll talk a little bit more in just a moment about the cash match. This grant program only supports one artist, company, or ensemble. The application deadline is Monday, May 3rd, and applicants will be notified of funding decisions in late July. So there's lots of new things that are happening this year. Because of the impact of COVID, we have made some changes to the guidelines and project expectations. We acknowledge your continued flexibility and applaud your creativity during this time. We know that all of you have been impacted and have made adjustments to your programming due to the pandemic. As I mentioned earlier, our strategic plan focuses on supporting Southern artists. Because of who we are, supporting Southern artists continues to be a high priority for us. If you plan to submit an application, you must engage a Southern artist that currently resides in our 9-state region. If you need help finding a Southern artist, we have some resources on our website that might be helpful. Due to COVID, we know that travel is limited, so we no longer require applicants to engage Southern artists from outside of their state. Instead, you can now engage a Southern artist from within or outside of your state. Also, we know that in-person presentations are not possible for many and still are very limited. So we will accept applications for virtual programming. Your project can include virtual or in-person activities, or perhaps a combination of both. Of course, we are very aware that the pandemic has drastically impacted your finances and budget, so we will have a temporary adjustment to the cash match requirement from a 1-to-1 cash match to a 50% cash match this year. So what that means, again, is if the artist fee is $6,000, you can request $4,000 from South Arts and you must provide a $2,000 cash match. Finally, this grant program now supports all disciplines, including film, documentary, fiction, experimental, and animation, performing arts, theater, music, opera, musical theater, and dance, literary arts, fiction, creative nonfiction, and poetry, and visual arts, crafts, drawing, experimental, painting, photography, sculpture, and mixed media. So let's now take a look at who and what we fund for the presentation grants. We only support nonprofit, governmental, or federally recognized tribal organizations within our 9-state region. Required project activities include either readings, performances, film screenings, or exhibitions that are open to the general public, and educational activities provided by the guest artist. The educational component is not limited to K-12 student participation, but can include a variety of other participants. Guest artists, again, must reside currently in our 9-state region, and our funds only support accessible programming. I'll talk more about that soon, and artist fees. We use the following criteria to evaluate grant applications. We use panels made up of professionals from the arts and presenting field to serve as reviewers. I'm going to briefly touch on each of these, but we will spend more time discussing accessibility and readiness plans. The artistic excellence is solely about the quality, experience, and skill of the artist or company. Work samples should reflect and represent the type of work the artist or company will provide during your project. Be sure to include a strong work sample from the artist in your application. The project artistic merit is about the project's quality, the public presentation, and the educational component. We would like as much detail as possible in order to have a clear understanding of your project and goals. Audience development includes assessing the audience and community needs, cultivating audiences, creating a plan for engagement, and developing effective partnerships. We want to see what strategies for audience development and how your community is involved in planning and implementation in your application. You should also provide details about your project partners. For accessibility, we like to know if there is an understanding of the diverse needs of individuals with disabilities, whether your organization is proactive, and if there is evidence of outreach strategies. Organizational capacity looks at your presenting and programming history and how you plan to evaluate your project. We like to know who you have presented or programmed in the past. We like to know who and what is involved in your project evaluation. Also, as part of your application, you must provide a description of your readiness plan. As you may know, South Arts has been committed to making business continuity planning a priority in the arts for many years. And we encourage all arts organizations to develop and maintain readiness plans to ensure their sustainability. A readiness plan is a combination of documents, processes, and training that formulate what your organization will do should the unexpected occur. And we know that you've already done this during this past year. For the past several years, readiness plans have been required as a part of eligibility for our grants, and we're happy to say that all applicants have complied in the past. This requirement should not be a barrier to any applicant. If you have just began or haven't even started readiness planning, simply tell us where you are in this work. Soon I'll turn the presentation over to Molly, who will share more information about readiness. But for now, let's go back to accessibility and talk a bit more about accessibility in detail. In addition to our diversity, equity, and inclusion work at South Arts, we also prioritize accessibility. You are required to ensure physical and programmatic access to individuals with disabilities. It is a requirement for federal funding and a civil rights issue. We look for going above and beyond the fact that people who are in wheelchairs can get into your building. That is just the minimum threshold. So let's take a look at mobility, vision, hearing, and cognitive disabilities. Applicants and presenters can be much more proactive, and this is an important market for you not to overlook, particularly as many organizations have aging audiences. For mobility, think about how you can offer a barrier-free environment, companion seating, and effective communication, such as physical signage or a website with transportation and arrival options. For vision, think about large print materials, braille, audio description, and tactile opportunities, for example. Hearing resources can include assistive listening systems or devices, real-time captioning, and American Sign Language interpretation. And cognitive and sensory options may be offering sensory-friendly programs, pre-visit preparation materials, break spaces, and staff training. Oftentimes, our applicants focus on facility accessibility. Beyond that, we want to know what actions you will take for programmatic and accessibility communication. I want to give a couple examples. This might include planning and advisory committees that include people with disabilities. I've already mentioned some examples such as large print programs or labels, American Sign Language interpretation, and audio description. Remember that many people, from boomers with limited mobility to young people receiving a diagnosis on the spectrum, want to fully participate in the arts activities that you offer. There are lots of resources available for accessibility. the National Endowment for the Arts has a new website, and their accessibility design publication was relaunched last year. They also offer a self-assessment and other tools to help you improve accessibility. Americans with Disabilities Act centers are rich with resources and are free, so we encourage you to take a look at these resources in your planning. And finally, the Kennedy Center, your local state arts agency's accessibility coordinator, and South Arts offer resources as well. So now we'll talk a little bit more about readiness planning. I will turn the presentation over to Molly to share.
Thank you, Nikki. As Nikki mentioned, South Arts has been encouraging readiness on behalf of arts organizations across the country for many years. So if you've worked with South Arts before, this isn't news to you. But just to give you a sense of what we're looking for in the application process, we have a few slides. And I'll start by reminding you that this is 5% of your score. And again, we applaud all of you who have been so flexible in pivoting and reimagining your programming and responding to your community over the last year, and have hopefully found that your readiness planning has served you well in this very strange time. And I also want to say that as part of your plan, or if you are in the process of beginning your plan, a nice place to go right now would be documenting the decision-making processes that you have made over the last year, kind of codifying the things that worked and reflecting and tweaking the things that didn't work so well is a good practice to have for the next time that you need to go through a difficult decision-making process. We're looking for 3 things in readiness plans. The first is content. Is it specific to your organization? Are there policies, processes, procedures, and trainings for what you'll do if your organization is impacted or stopped by a crisis of any type, natural or human caused, and of any scale? We also look for, is it comprehensive? Does it address all of your critical functions, which we'll talk about in the next slide? And is it up to date? Is it current? Have you reviewed it over the last year to make sure that your practices are in place, that any new staff or leadership is involved and aware of what's in the plan? And then we also want to note here that the scale of your plan should be specific to your organization. We're not looking for a tome, and in fact, many of the most highest rated plans are from small organizations. Their plan might only be a page or 2, but it is clear and it's obvious that they have thought through who will do what in case of emergency. So we look at the critical business functions of arts and cultural organizations. Your people, your IT, finances and insurance, communications, programs, your collections and assets, which include specialty equipment for performing arts organizations, costumes, property, libraries, that type of thing. Your community, your facilities, and making sure that you have trainings and drills. So basically, developing a plan is asking yourself, what will you do if your access to any of these functions is cut off? If you lose a key personnel member of your staff, whether that's because of illness or termination or any other cause, it really doesn't matter what causes you to lose access to that person, they're not available to you. So you need to make sure that others are available to pick up and are knowledgeable about how to fill in for them. With finances, if your ticketing software goes down, do you have a plan where you can still sell tickets? Communications, if your server is hacked, do you know how you will secure your data and how you will restore it? With facilities, you might have storm damage, you might have a disagreement with your landlord, you might walk in one day and there's mold and you have to vacate the premises immediately until that's remediated. So thinking through these various functions is more productive, we think, than thinking through every single type of crisis that might hit you. A special note here for those of you who work, are part of a college or university, or are involved with the city or county on a larger campus. One thing that we have found is that many of these, quote, parent organizations don't necessarily include the very specific and unique needs and characteristics of your program and your facility in the master readiness plan. So making sure that you have a conversation with them to make sure that they recognize your unique nature. Making sure that your plan meshes with theirs and theirs with yours. For instance, often a college or university emergency plan just deals with the campus community, the students and faculty and the academic facilities and venues. So the fact that you are bringing guest artists from outside of the community potentially, that you have audiences that are not part of the daily campus life. All of those things are places where you need to have a conversation to make sure that you can communicate effectively, and that if something occurs either before or during an event, there are clear lines of authority and communication. Who actually makes the call if an event is canceled or suspended, and who decides what the communications are to the public? We do offer a number of readiness plan resources. artsready.org is our website, and we post current information there. You'll find current information about COVID resources there, as well as tools to start your readiness planning process. We also will be launching the ArtsReady 2.0 online planning tool later in 2021. And for that subscription service, subsidies will be available so that there will be no cost to you to sign up initially. We also encourage you to visit the Performing Arts Readiness Project, performingartsreadiness.org. This organization offers an incredible roster of free webinars, which are recorded and are excellent resources for specific areas of readiness. And they also provide workshops and consultancies across the country. So as you prepare your application, this is what we'll be looking for. A description of your readiness plan. This should be up to 2 pages, and again should address the content, comprehensiveness, and currency criteria that I discussed a few moments ago. We recommend that you don't rush your planning process in order to get something in to us. We believe in starting where you are and making it a solid plan. So if you don't currently have a plan, we really recommend that, again, you take some time, look at the online resources at southarts.org and artsready.org, and at least start to make a plan. If you submit something to us, that is better than submitting nothing, because then we can't literally process your application, accept your application. But just submit something, tell us where you are, and that certainly does count. Again, what may surprise you is some of the strongest plans come in very consolidated form from smaller organizations. You can use any resource that you like to develop your plan. We don't, make any concerted distinction. And also, if you would like to receive feedback on your plan description, you can submit those to Nikki at least 4 weeks prior to the grant deadline, and I can review those and give you kind of higher order feedback on the things that you might, excuse me, want to clarify or explore more in your readiness plan.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Molly.
and we can answer questions at the end.
Thank you. So I'll begin to wrap up by explaining the submission and review process. Your entire application is submitted online through our eGrant system. There is nothing to mail in. You will be required to complete the application form, which does include a project narrative along with the executed contract between you and the artist work sample, which can be audio or video, digital images, or written samples. You also will need to submit the artist's support materials, such as their bio or the company's history of performing, or exhibition work, for example. And finally, the readiness plan description. And as Molly and I both have said, we don't want this to be a barrier for any applicant. Simply tell us where you are in this work, and we will be as helpful as possible to share any resources that we have to complement what you're already doing. Additional documents that can be included with your application but not required is proof of government status only if you are a municipality or perhaps a state or a state college or university, for example. An additional support document like letters of support or a program brochure is also allowed. But I want to ask you to please be sure to allow enough time to collect all of these materials, review them, so that you'll have them in time for the application deadline. When you submit your application, South Arts staff reviews it for completeness. The panel reviews it for funding consideration. For presentation grants, this process takes about 12 weeks. South Arts staff makes award recommendations based on the panel review. For presentation grants, we will offer both partial and full funding of applications. Please be aware that if you receive a South Arts grant, it is important to remember that you have agreed to the contract terms as part of the application process, so please read it carefully. And you're also required to provide a 50% cash match of the grant amount. A site visit by a South Arts staff is possible, but not likely, particularly now. We also want to mention that you must acknowledge South Arts and the National Endowment for the Arts. You're also required to write your federal legislators about the award, and we also think it's always nice to encourage your elected officials to attend your funded events as well. Finally, you will need to complete a fairly simple report once your project ends. Photos and videos are optional, but we greatly appreciate them and want to ask that if you are awarded a grant that you include those with your report. Typically, grant awards are paid after the project is complete and you have submitted the report. However, grantees are allowed to request an advance payment. So just a few tips before we wrap up, just to help you prepare your application. Please carefully review and understand the guidelines and the changes for this year. Get familiar with our e-grant system. This is what you will use to submit your grant. Gather your materials like press kits, work samples, and contracts from artists early so that you have plenty of time to review them, get the appropriate approval, and to upload it as part of your application. Make sure that you use the scoring matrix as a guide. This can be helpful. It provides some benchmarks. And finally, make sure that you have the technology to upload the necessary documents. We do not extend deadlines, so please plan accordingly. And just a few more tips that I always think is worthy of mention. Again, we want you to provide as much detail as possible. We know that there are many things that are unknown, so we understand. Please answer all the questions and submit good work samples for the artist or company. You might also want to review the narrative questions plenty of time before the deadline in eGrant and also on our website. And in preparation for using eGrant, you should note that there are maximum limits to your responses, and I would recommend that you perhaps craft your responses in Word. That way you can check the character count, and you can also use spell check and other features, and then simply paste that information in eGrant. So on our website, you do have access to the scoring matrix that we use to evaluate applications. And know that there is a more specific scoring matrix for readiness, and we have specific criteria for accessibility. This is on our website, and you can use it to help you in planning your narrative response. You can access the guidelines, instructions, eGrant system, and all of the resources that I've mentioned today by visiting our website and selecting community and organization grants, and then selecting presentation grants. finally, you can get detailed assistance by contacting me. If you have any questions about the grants process, you can call me or shoot me an email. I am available through the deadline to help you. So now let's take a look at the questions that you have. And if you do have a question, please type it in the Q&A box at the bottom. We will read and answer each question. And if you have additional questions after this morning, do not hesitate to contact us. Again, Ethan Messier, our Assistant Director Presenting and Touring, will assist with the questions you've submitted.
Thanks, Nikki. Just a heads up to everybody, a couple of the more straightforward questions have been answered in the chat box or in the Q&A box, so feel free to look at those. But ones that deserve a little more discussion are being held for Nikki. Nikki, first of all, can you please reiterate what you mean by the grant only funds one artist? Does that mean only one person or one group? Could it be an ensemble?
Yes, so this grant program only funds one individual artist if, for example, you're going to host a solo exhibition by an artist. It will also, it also supports one ensemble or one company. So essentially one artist or one company or one ensemble.
Thank you. The next question is, does the educational component have to include K-12?
It does not, and I think this is a common misunderstanding when we talk about the education component. We look for a wide variety of audiences that can be served by this requirement. Many organizations tend to provide programs for students, which is wonderful. However, we're also open to adult learners at a college or university, perhaps seniors at a community center. So any combination, but K through 12 students is not a requirement for the audience as the educational participation.
Thank you, Nikki. Does the educational component have to be at the craft, or could it be about the subject matter? For instance, if a filmmaker did a documentary about the opioid crisis, could the educational session be about addiction, or would it have to be about the filmmaking?
Either or. So we really leave it up to you, the artist, and your community. So whatever is going to be the best fit for your community, it's also based on the artist's capacity and interest as well as yours. So no limitations on that.
Okay, this question. Would an organization be eligible to apply to do 2 public presentations, performances, or a split concert? For example, first half would be an artist presenting solo, and the second half would then be playing with some musicians from perhaps a local orchestra.
So if I understand the question correctly, if the applicant is applying for one artist and that artist will, as part of the program, will perform as a solo artist on the first half and then perform along with other artists, perhaps local groups on the second half, that is acceptable. We would, this may require more conversation, but the assumption that I'm going by is that the applicant is applying for the one solo artist that will do 2 different types of presentation.
Although an artist is leading the project, can the artist include collaborators under their direction?
I would probably need more detail about what that means. So if it depends on the discipline. So that question, I would say, let's have an offline conversation so I can have more detail about the project. But essentially, this grant program supports kind of a single entity. If it is an artist collective that's coming together to perform a work or to be a part of an exhibition, perhaps the collective can be considered the single artist as part of the application. But I'd really need to know more about what the the collaboration is and more details about it to answer. So whomever asked that question, if you don't mind giving me a call or shoot me an email, I'd like to talk more about this.
What are the specific requirements around artists' residence? We are presenting an artist who spends part of the year in New Orleans and part of the year in Texas.
So our current definition is that the artist has to have a residency in our region. So if there is proof that the artist resides part-time in the South, then that will satisfy the criteria, but we would likely have to have some evidence, perhaps. I can provide examples upon further discussion, but there would have to be documented evidence that the artist resides in the region for at least part of the time.
Thank you. This person has a large project in mind, and the application would be for a single artist or ensemble within that project. When completing the questions about the project category, should the category correspond with the full project, for example, multidisciplinary, or the single artist, for example, film?
The single artist. And I would say in the application that as much as you can, and as much as it makes sense, to try to focus the NADA responses around the artist you're requesting support for, but definitely provide the larger context that that artist will be involved in as part of the larger project, so that the panelists in South Arts can truly understand the project, but completely understand the individual artist's role within that larger project.
Thank you. This next person wants to know about a specific project. If they brought the Mississippi Symphony Orchestra, 3 ensemble groups, for instance, brass, strings, woodwinds, and those groups did hands-on presentations in elementary schools for 3rd and 4th graders. If it culminated in 2 children's concerts for over 1,000 children, would that be eligible?
Only if the 2 children's concerts happened at a place and time that was open to the general public. If it was solely a concert that was only open to the students during school hours, then no.
Thank you. This person writes that previously they've received a literary touring grant for a group of 3 to 4 authors to hold public readings and an educational program. Are they no longer permitted to engage multiple authors in a single proposal?
Unfortunately, no. And we recognize that this may be a barrier for not only literary arts, but some other disciplines. At this time, we're only accepting applications for 1 artist, 1 company, or 1 ensemble. So you, if you are a previous literary arts touring grantee and you've previously applied for multiple writers, that will not be allowed this year.
Thank you. This question has to do with the executed artist contract. What if they are waiting for the grant to execute the contract?
So what I would recommend is that you provide a letter of intent, which is not as formal as an executed contract, that has all the elements that is required, whether you submit an executed contract or a letter of intent, outlining the dates, the services, meaning the number of presentations and the number of educational activities, the fee, and signed by both parties. That can be submitted in lieu of an executed contract. And sometimes, depending on the artist and the organization, both might agree to some terminology within that letter of interest, saying that, you know, this the intent of this project is contingent upon grant funding. So that's something that you might have to negotiate with the artist.
Thank you. These next couple questions have to do with NEA funding. Is it possible to submit a funding request to both the NEA and South Arts for the same project?
It is not. So this particular grant program is solely funded by the the National Endowment for the Arts, we are regranting federal funds, so you cannot apply to South Arts and the National Endowment for the Arts for the same project. You can apply to the endowment for a different project.
If
Or
someone,
to South Arts for a different project.
and I think that answers the next question. If an applicant received NEA funding for a different program, are they still eligible for this grant?
So yes, if you received federal funding for a different program, you can still apply to South Arts for this new or different project.
Nikki, can the artist be from the same city as the presenter?
Yes.
Thank you. Are churches eligible to apply?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a limited number to artists and their artist fees?
There is no limit. I mean, we see a wide range of artist fees in our applications. So there's only a limit to the minimum you can request, which is $1,000. And there's only a limit to the maximum request, which is $7,500. The artist fee can exceed well past your request limitations. So there are no restrictions there other than there is a minimum request. So the artist fee has to be at minimum $1,500. Because again, an artist fee of $1,500 means that you can request $1,000 from South Arts, which is the minimum, and that you would match it by $500. So if the artist fee is not at least $1,500, it would not meet the eligibility criteria for the grant size of this program.
Thank you. Can grant funds be used for artist fees that are a part of a larger festival?
Yes, so since we don't support projects like an entire festival, and we would support only one artist out of multiple artists that are being presented in that festival, yes, this grant program is meant for these types of presentations where you would select one artist out of your festival to submit an application for.
Can an organization apply for multiple grants for the same project through South Arts? For example, a presentation for a visual artist and a Jazz Road grant around a museum exhibit.
Well, that doesn't sound like the same project to me, so perhaps I'm not quite understanding. But if the question is, can you apply to Jazz Road to present a jazz musician, and you want to apply to the presentation grant program for a visual artist, then yes, you can do both. If I'm not getting your question answered, if I didn't quite understand your question, please contact me so that we can further discuss.
Can multiple units within a larger organization, such as a university, apply for funding?
Only if they are not sharing the same federal ID number. So in many cases in the past, we've had universities have either a foundation apply for, one department, say visual arts, and the university, the larger institution apply for a performing arts grant program. So multiple applications can be accepted only if the federal ID number isn't the same, because we only accept one application from an organization.
Thank you. Nikki, are any art disciplines favored over any others in this adjudication process?
No.
If only the lead person in a band is BIPOC, would the band be considered BIPOC?
I would say the general rule is that we expect for it to be the majority of an ensemble. If it's multiple members of a ensemble, group, or band.
Thank you. I'm gonna mash these two together. Can you explain how the 1 to 2 match for artist fee support and the 50% cash match work? And are there restrictions on where the match dollars can come from?
Okay, so I'll just use the example that I shared earlier. If the artist fee is $6,000, you can request 1/3, you must provide a cash match of 1/3, and you can request 2/3 from South Arts. So with an artist fee of $6,000, you can request $4,000 from South Arts, and then you will be required to provide $2,000. Your $2,000 and our $4,000 equals the artist fee for the artist. Your match can be a combination of sponsorship, donations, admission fees, and perhaps even your local state arts agency grants. If you apply to your local arts agency, may be able to be used as a cash match. You would need to check with your state arts agency to make sure that they don't consider this double dipping in any way. South Arts doesn't have a policy against using your state arts agency support as a cash match, but there might be different guidelines depending on your state arts agency. So it can be a number. Your cash match can include a variety of options.
Thank you. This grant only funds the artist fees. Does it cover any supplies an artist might need for the performance, project, or workshop?
It does not. It really only covers the fee that the artist would require to provide the presentation and to provide the educational component. Now, if part of the artist fee includes perhaps travel expenses or lodging that's required as part of travel, if you are engaging an artist outside of your immediate community, we would consider the travel expenses and lodging expenses only if it's part of an all-inclusive artist fee rate. So that means that you're guaranteeing the artist a certain fee regardless of if they end up driving or flying or staying in a hotel or staying with someone else. So what you're saying is that your fee is $6,000, and we can look at that amount. If your contract states the fee is $4,000 and we will cover travel, that is not something that we can support, because what we're looking at is the guaranteed fee that you are promising the artist. So it really depends on how the contract language is spelled out, but I would say that if it's an all-inclusive rate that includes travel expenses and lodging, that is the fee we'll look at. If the fee breaks down, has an itemized kind of structure, then that might present some limitations to what you can request. But
Nikki,
it does not support, it does not support supplies.
Thank you, Nikki. Can you reiterate if the education and presentation can be virtual, if any part can be virtual for this grant?
Yes, both can be virtual. Or what we're seeing is that a hybrid, some organizations are doing both. So they might offer the educational component as virtual, for example, and an in-person presentation.
Thank you. Does the panel give preference to projects using artists listed in the artist directory?
No, they do not. In fact, they don't I imagine that many of them don't even reference the artist directory. It's not a requirement for applicants, so it's solely there as a resource to provide applicants with a way to find Southern artists that we presented or that we've supported in the past through our grant programs and conferences and other programs that have been through an adjudicated process. So likely the panel would not know unless you mention it in the application that you selected the artist from the list of artists that we have on our website. And we probably have time for one more question, Ethan. And I'll say that if I did not get to your question, please do be in touch. Shoot me an email or call me. I want to make sure that we answer all of your questions.
Let me just go through. We are part of a consortium of presenters who are working on a major project. We put in a grant request to the NEA already. Could another presenter from the consortium apply to South Arts to fund a different part of the project still within the same program?
So if one of the presenters out of the consortium wants to submit an application to South Arts for a portion of a project that you're currently not seeking National Endowment for the Arts funding for, yes. Okay, I think we've just about run out of time. Great questions. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions that we didn't get to, or if questions come up when you're beginning to complete your application, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find my contact information on the website. I want to thank you all for joining us this morning, and we hope that the information shared was helpful.